Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the launch of the 29th Annual Kent Property Market Report. I'm Ron Rosa, Chairman of Caxtons, co-authors and producers of this report, and I'm your host for this morning. The report is a unique collaborative publication which is replicated nowhere else in the UK. It's written and produced by a partnership of Kent County Council's Economic Development Division, locating Kent, and us in Caxtons, supported by locally based specialist firms and endorsed by the RICS. Well, given the COVID-19 circumstances, we decided back in August on this webinar format, and hope that you agree that it was the right call, especially given Boris's decision to lock down again from tomorrow. Well, you've certainly signed up in very impressive numbers, a fantastic 360 of you. And I can't see too many pajama bottoms on my screen. And you've all arrived even though you have to cook your own breakfast this year. We're grateful to Kent Invicta Chamber for their support in facilitating this event, and especially to Molly Hall, who's pressing the buttons and pulling the levers to make it all happen. The webinar format has enabled us to start the day with an interactive session in chat rooms, each hosted by one of our sponsors. So we have Cripps Pemberton Greenish, DHA, Holloway Studio, MHA, Locating Kent, and two of my Caxtons director colleagues. I hope you enjoyed the topics and found the sessions useful, and we thank all of those companies for their support, plus our one other sponsor, Handelsbanken. Now, this morning we have 4 speakers for you. Firstly, Sue Foxley, on behalf of Caxtons, will present the main points from the report. Sue will be followed by Roger Gough, leader of Kent County Council, who in turn will be followed by our guest speaker, Jeremy Rainbird, co-founder of the Creative District Improvement Company, who've partnered with Quinn Estates to create Kent's new TV and film studios in Ashford. Our closing speaker is Mike Whiting, Cabinet Member for Economic Development at KCC. Now, listening to them, perhaps a burning question will come to mind, and you can raise these through the chat function on your screen. And we hope to have time at the end to cover a very small number of questions. So please tell us to whom you would like to aim your question, and let us know who you are, of course. So, getting the show on the road, let me introduce you to Sue Foxley, who will take us through the highlights from the report. Over to you, Sue.
Thanks, Ron. I am now going to share my screen, so hopefully all goes well from here. Okay, so last year when, for those of you who were with us at breakfast and all together, I said it had been the most difficult report to write since my experience. And I said something along the lines of hopefully life will feel a lot easier next year. So I'm not a great believer in fate, but I'm not going to say anything like that this year. It's been clearly a difficult period, and sorry, I'm just over recent months, an unprecedented time. So what I'm going to do this morning is talk a little bit about the economy, a little bit about the background to the Kent market, and then go through each of the sectors in fairly general terms. There's lots of detail in the report, so I'm going to leave you to sort of browse that at your leisure. But for the moment, I'm just going to sort of generally talk about the headline figures and how Kent falls in that. So if we just look very briefly at the economy here, and really just putting it in context in terms of the financial crisis, really. So, you know, this felt bad. This is quite extraordinary, as we all know. These are generally, most people are accepting that we're going to see GDP this year fall around 10%, just a little bit more than that. There's still jury's out, and I think we have to accept that actually we're only partway through the crisis. You know, from a human tragedy perspective, it's dreadful. From an economic perspective, it's dreadful as well. And there's a huge range of forecasts, some better than others, but it's likely to be something in that region in terms of a recovery and in how we're looking at now. But clearly it's early days, and there's also a great deal of uncertainty about what will happen going into 2022. I think it's also interesting just to very briefly look at the different sectors and the relative performance there. So if we look at services, they didn't suffer quite so much, and have sort of seen a mute recovery. Construction sector, which we're obviously talking about a lot today, really suffered in the beginning because of the complete lockdown, but has bounced back strongly. And there are some really positive, strong stories that have come out, not only in Kent, but across the country in terms of the construction sector. And it is likely to be really important going forward, because the government is likely to be funding that in terms of supporting the economy and growth and the rebound of that. I think the other interesting one is manufacturing and how well actually that has come out in general. And that, again, that's an important one for Kent. So if we just look, what I've got, these are UK figures in the large chart, and what we're looking at here is a survey that the ONS have been running, looking at what sectors are doing better than others and where they're struggling. And anything really where the grey is beyond the 50% is suffering more in general terms. So as we would expect, accommodation, food, arts, entertainment are the ones that are really struggling. Up here, IT, we're all on Zoom this morning, and have really discovered that IT side of things. So that's obviously been very important. Construction, as I mentioned, hasn't struggled as much in general on average. Professional, scientific and technical has done better. So then if you look down the side, what I've tried to do here is just a very sort of simple look at resilience from a Kent perspective. And what's clear is that there are a number of sectors in Kent where we're, from an employment perspective, we're overrepresented. And there's actually, you know, we've got the construction is important, motor trade, that's not selling cars particularly at the moment, but it's actually a lot of the mending and fixing, and that's actually done relatively well as people had taken that in. Manufacturing is relatively strong. I think that where we've also got strong representation on down here, actually a number of these sectors, while they've struggled, so the education, the health and social work, they also didn't see large amounts of furloughing. So from a consumer's perspective, Kent is in a relatively stronger position than many locations. So looking at how that translates then into the various sectors across the market. Now, it has to be said, for anyone trying to put values on as rents or even worse, actually at the moment, yields is a real struggle. So in some cases, we've had enough evidence and we've been able to put some values in, and in some cases we've kind of gone for Q1 and where things were, because there just isn't sufficient transactions that are going on in the market, just for disruption and uncertainty. But the business park market has actually been strong. What we've seen in terms of rents is them hold up, but there's also been a lot of activity coming forward in terms of new occupiers. Discovery Park have seen a number of science and tech occupiers. The same at Kent Science Park. Kings Hill have seen interest from occupiers moving out of London and perhaps decentralising. So, you know, I guess the point at the moment is we don't know how the office market or the business park market is going to evolve, but generally business parks across the country have done relatively well in the situation, because they can control the environment. They're in the position of businesses generally have parking, and so during the pandemic period they've been able to continue operating and manage their environment well. The office market from a UK perspective has struggled clearly, over, and that's particularly in the major cities. I suppose what the question at the moment is whether that's going to be, how that's going to play out in smaller towns, such as those in Kent, the more suburban towns. And there's, you know, in kind of research world, people think about these things, and I suppose there's a lot of thought at the moment that possibly smaller towns will do better. There will be more decentralization of activity. There might be more smaller sort of shared workspace where people work at home more. I think we can generally say that people will be working at home more. We won't go back to where we were, and that's a challenge for a sort of a major city centre like London. It's not clear how that's going to operate here. For anyone, I don't know if you follow the Deloitte survey that regularly talks about when we'll be going back to the office. That is, in terms of what people are coming through on that, it was kind of Q4, then it moved to Q1, and it's really now looking like people don't think they'll be returning to the office for another until the end of next year. And to me, that's a drift. So that's a restructuring. So longer term, I suspect that Kent might be okay in this respect, and town centres will benefit from in a wider sense. But in the short term, there's clearly going to be uncertainty. And I think that one of the points on that is, and it's going back to the economic slide, one of the real challenges in the economy at the moment is the lack of business investment. The property market really relies on that. So that's moving offices, that's investing in stock, whether it's in manufacturing. And we'd actually seen a slight uptick in that before the pandemic, as people prepare for Brexit and perhaps introducing a bit more technology and a bit more efficiency. But actually we've seen that step back. There's clearly uncertainty, and it's not a time that people want to be investing. And that isn't necessarily in the short term good for the property market. I just wanted to pick up on this point, particularly because we'll be talking about this scheme down here a little bit later. I showed a few similar figures last year, and looking at stronger elements of the economy. So if we look back at where we were around here when we met over our sausages last year, it was motion pictures and the science, and I pointed out, and what I was saying there is how important that is going forward for the Kent economy. Now, clearly science, you know, as we know from our own science parks in Kent, activity has continued, and never have we seen so many scientists on the news, which is a great thing, and actually a very good thing for Kent and everything that's going on. I'm not worried about this, because if we look at the performance of Netflix, of Disney, and all of these other channels, this will come back. It's a practical issue in terms of what is actually feasible at the moment, given the restrictions. So this still remains a really, really important sector of that media film side of things. And I think, if anything, even more important. So once that can get back into operation, I think it's really important. I think, you know, really what's important is tracking that against the more traditional service sectors of business, financial services, which were growing very slowly. They were mature, they weren't seeing the growth. If anything, they were seeing employment loss before all of this. And so it's a matter from a Kent perspective, is really looking at those sectors that will be coming through in the future. And of course, at the moment, I think probably the best thing we can do is look to the future as much as possible. The industrial market, as you probably are aware, is the real winner from the pandemic, if one can say that it's saved a lot of us in terms of actually just being able to continue with life, and it really is combined with Kent already being discovered by the institutions, and the distribution and logistics company is how close it is to London and of course the continent, but also the sharp uptake in terms of demand. So we have seen a large increase in rents, and that really has been across the board, and it depends which timeframes you look at. But Dartford, you'd obviously understand, but there are different things going on in different markets. Some of it is very logistics focused, and some of it is very much more focused on engineering and other more manufacturing sectors. But I know my colleague Mark Caxton talked a little bit more detail about this earlier, so I won't go over the same points again. But just really to highlight this, the impact and what the longer term impact of the retail sales side of things. It's very much has been driven, a lot of this demand. We were fortunate that we had stock already coming through in the market, and there was a lot of stock there that actually the logistics operators could enter into. But we can just see this staggering increase of a steady increase. And actually last year, online sales had leveled off a little bit, and people were starting to talk about whether we had actually reached a sort of threshold of online sales. But we've just stepped up and probably moved five or 10 years in terms of that online sale activity. And while it has come back and will probably slip back further, it will remain an important part of it. And just part of that really is then looking at the retail market and how that's adjusted. And I think it's interesting to see the M&S results this morning in terms of where the balance is. The food has done very well, their online sales have done very well. So developments like this are really important, that they'll be able to drive, they'll be able to pick up online sales material. Just in terms of retail spending, we clearly saw the dip, but we've seen that recover quite strongly actually, but it's not across the board. It's not every sector hasn't seen that high growth. Clothing has particularly struggled, that's moved online. And if we look here, that we can see that this 4.2, that's the non-store retailing, that's the online sales. Non-food store is really mute. Food retailing is pretty strong. So there is a real mixed picture. So the retail market now is very much these logistics sites. It's being able to click and collect and food. But you know, again, it's very early days, and probably if you go around any shopping centre or town today, it will probably be quite busy as we all try to stock up on what's needed for the next month. Unfortunately, of course, the pandemic has occurred when the retail sector was struggling anyway, and there was already a restructuring underway during that process. But I think, you know, I'm really grateful to Credit Retail who've talked me through the market at a very, very difficult time. And I think probably the expectation that we're going to see rents fall. At the moment, we're seeing incentives fall. But what's great is that we're also seeing towns reinvent themselves. We're seeing a lot of independents take space, landlords being pragmatic, and really the towns will be having to find a new purpose. There'll be repurposing space and really adjusting, and there will be new developments that come forward, and they will be really, really important for energizing those towns going forward. So again, thanks to Credit Retail for the rents. These are in Q1 this year, and really there's limited evidence to suggest where we are. I suspect next year it will be different, but there are, you know, I think what's important is that town centres don't stand still, but they keep moving. And just very quickly, this is some stuff that's produced by the local data company, and just highlighting the importance really of the small high street and the essential retail. This is essential retail from a lockdown perspective. Much higher proportion of that essential retail, and they're the ones that have seen the least level of change in footfall. So small high streets that provide local facilities and local things that people need are really important at the moment. And then just finally looking at the residential market, as we know, we have seen a really strong, and probably not what we would have predicted when we first went into lockdown, a really strong level of transactions. And we've also seen price growth. It's around 7% at the moment on an annualized basis, and mortgages are at a 12-month high in terms of applications. And you know, this is is pent-up demand. You know, there's people sat still, kind of maybe just worrying about the home they're in and want to move, not having to go into the city all the time. But there's also a lot of government incentives there in terms of the stamp duty threshold rise. I'm really grateful to RPC Land for their help with these figures, and also to Zoopla, who provide sort of a bespoke piece of analysis for the Kent Property Market Report. And I think a couple of just general points here, where we've seen the growth over the last 12 months, and actually generally over the last 5 years, have been the more affordable locations. And that is really important in terms of actually going forward. So it's been where transport is good, access into town, but homes are affordable, and we've obviously seen large numbers of people coming out of London during this period as well. And I think that's probably just going to continue as people look to sort of change lifestyle and not necessarily have to go into London every day. These are short national figures, just looking at detached homes compared to semi-detached and flats, and in terms of price growth. And we know from a lot of the news stories, I think there's something out this morning on the growth of the higher value home. I suspect this is a short-term factor, because actually affordability and interest in flats is going to remain, and people still will want to buy their own home, and there's a lot of incentives to do that. So I think we've got a short-term issue here in terms of who actually can afford to buy. Longer term, over the medium term, there is clearly worries about unemployment and affordability. So, you know, I think probably we can expect the housing market to calm down, and there's going to be a real mixed bag in terms of performance. Again, for our new build prices that are presented in the report, we've gone for Q1 because of limited evidence there. But I think probably what's fair to say when talking to Graham Dowd at RPC on this is the fact that actually the new build market has held up a lot stronger. In fact, it is very busy, and not necessarily what we were predicting from the outset. And I'm conscious I'm running over time, sorry, Ron. So my very last points are, there's going to be a massive variation in terms of performance. And if I these are total returns for the commercial sector. And these were produced in August, thanks to the Investment Property Forum for allowing us to use these. And it's just an enormous range of forecasts. Next year, it's a tighter, well, for the next 4 years, it's a tighter range. But I think we just can expect this to keep changing as kind of life changes around us. What's really important from a Kent perspective is it has the benefits of affordability still relative to the southeast. Its location remains strong. London will remain important, as will other markets. And what's really important is capturing that longer term growth. So the science, the media, the strong locations and towns and places to visit, because we will go back to going out to eat, having breakfast together and doing all these other things. So, you know, I think the county is well placed for the long term, and property is really important, will be a really important part for delivering that. Thank you, and apologies for running over like that.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Sue. As ever, huge amount of detail in there, but some scope for optimism, I thought. Now, as I say, lots of detail for everyone to try and take on. And you can read more about your specific sector interests in your own copy of the report, and you can get that downloaded from kentpropertymarket.com. Well, this time last year, Roger Gough was just 3 weeks into his new role as leader of Kent County Council, and we managed to secure him for our event. And I'm delighted to tell you that Roger joins us again this year to give us the County Hall perspective. So if you're ready, Roger.
I am. Ron, thank you, and good morning, everyone. First, just to say that clearly from the County Council's point of view, very grateful to our project partners located in Kent and to Caxtons as sponsors for jointly producing the document with us each year. Our thanks also to the RSCS for their endorsement of the report, and also for the range of sponsors and contributors, Cripps Pemberton Greenish, DHA Planning, Handelsbanken, Holloway Architects, and MHA McIntyre Hudson. And this continues, I think, this year, the strong reputation of this document. It's now in its 29th year. And I think it's been very much a tradition of it also that the leader of Kent County Council makes their contribution on this occasion. So I will pick up a little bit some of the themes that Sue set out in her remarks there, because I think they tie in quite nicely to what I am going to address, which is some of the particular developments we've seen particularly in the areas of regeneration and economic development and investment that have taken place over this period, and how they play into perhaps some of the longer term themes which Sue touched on, and I will too. Now, when we did have that launch of the report a year ago, and I was part of that, I remember that I reflected then on both the opportunities and the challenges of Kent's geographical location. Being close to London, able to benefit in many ways from that strategic position, but also very much affected by the uncertainties of a possible no-deal Brexit. One of the things I talked about then also was the development of things like the Thames Estuary production corridor, in which Kent was set to play a significant part. And I reflected at that time, as indeed I think the report had indicated, how resilient the Kent market showed itself in the face of Brexit uncertainty. And as Sue mentioned, we thought we had it tough then. Clearly, the world has moved on, changed. It's had the COVID-19 outbreak has had a major effect. And some of that we can only speculate about. Some of it, perhaps we can start to discern some of the effects, even if it's slightly looking through events and seeing how trends have been accelerated, which were perhaps already to a degree underway. And that very much links into areas such as the longer term future of town centres and how they will be reshaped. And that very much links to offices and use of offices. And we are ourselves, of course, not only a public authority, but actually a major holder of office space across the county. So this is something that for us and indeed for other major employers, a major question as to the degree to which our changed way of working will endure. I think it will, but that has important implications. Some of the signs too, and again, Sue touched on this, of both people and activity moving from London into perhaps sometimes those smaller to mid-sized towns, and some of the opportunities that gives us. So as the report itself says, the positive arguments in terms of the county's strategic position, its affordability, and the burgeoning science and creative industry sectors, those arguments continue to hold true, as well as some of the very specific developments in areas such as logistics, as Sue mentioned. So we have seen, as we said, some very major negative or some significant negative impacts, particularly in office and retail, as well as leisure and tourism. But there is a positive story about industrial and distribution and also business parks. And that I think fits in with some of those developments. And when we talk too about the strategic positioning of the county, it is that position between London and the continent, but it's also our position on the Thames. And one of the significant developments again in this last year has been the evolution and development, and it was just getting underway as I came into post, of the Thames Estuary Growth Board, which is itself seeking to set out a vision and encourage development and investment along that Thames Gateway. And I indeed sit on that board. So the sections of the report which the County Council, along with Medway Council and our district colleagues, have put together indicates, I think, many of the areas in which progress is being made, in spite of, some cases even helped along by, but often in spite of the impact of the COVID crisis. So I've spoken in the past about the important work that Locate in Kent does. And last year, or over the year between August and July, August 19 to July 2020, Locate in Kent successfully helped 69 companies to set up, move or expand in Kent and Medway, which is projected to create nearly 2,000 jobs over the next 3 years and retain another 2,000. At the end of July 2020, Locate in Kent had a pipeline of 274 investment projects for companies looking to start up, expand or relocate in Kent and Medway, some 17% of them being overseas companies. And interestingly, again tying into what we've been describing so far, Locate in Kent has seen a 57% rise in London-based businesses browsing commercial property in the county. That was just in the 3 months to the end of July, compared with the same period last year. and there's been a 15% uplift in commercial property inquiries in the same period. So some signs of those strategic and structural changes working in our favour. There's a whole range of material covered in the report in terms of major developments showing the degree to which Kent is still very much open for business. And I'll just touch on a number of those without going into great detail. So continuing evolution and development at Ebbsfleet Garden City, and at the other end of the county, and I think I spoke about this last year, the ongoing development of Otterpool Park near Hythe. And that, in fact, plays a major part in some of the thinking that I'll come back to later around what we call our infrastructure proposition. Significant housing development and public realm improvements in Dartford, in the town centre there, a major urban extension at Chilmington in Ashford. And as was touched on, continuing success at Discovery Park, a major centre of life sciences, and it's a developing ecosystem of businesses in that area with generating high value employment in the east of the county. A range of town centre projects across many of the significant towns in the county. But as I say, that has to be seen in the context perhaps of town centres that over time will be reimagined. We've seen the completion of Junction 10A at Ashford, and that now has a new dimension to it because of the Department for Transport's purchase of what's now known as the Sevington Inland Border Facility, playing a major part in the development in the plans for handling the end of transition at the end of December. And clearly, I mentioned logistics, Amazon in Dartford, and in logistics very much included within it, Panettone Park in Aylesford. And finally, worth mentioning also that the London Resort in Swanscombe, which after a period when that had gone relatively quiet, now starting to stir again and seeing that being brought forward. We're going to hear more shortly from Jeremy, so I won't say a great deal about the Newtown works, but clearly the important development there in terms of TV and film production facilities with planning permission granted by Ashford Borough Council in April. And similarly, also in Ashford, we have the development of the Jasmine Vardaman site, or KCC site in Javelin Way, Ashford, to include rehearsal and performance space and a hub for creative activity in Ashford. At the same time, that will provide a base for the company, but also you will see the development of Javelin Way site for wider employment use, but with a focus again on Ashford's creative economy. Some 29 light industrial units will be part of that. And overall, that scheme is being supported by not only by us, but by Arts Council England, Ashford Borough Council, South East LEP, and indeed other sources of funding, which I will come to in one moment. So underlying all this, there's been actually a significant commitment by public agencies to investment, to infrastructure and other major developments across the county. A part of that, significant part of that, has come through the South East LEP, on which again I sit on their board. And in particular, that has been through what's called the Local Growth Fund, launched back in March 2016, and with a new element of the third tier, or what's called tranche 3B of local growth fund funding, of which overall through that activity, South East LEP received £102 million of government funding. And that has helped deliver a range of schemes, including the Thanet Parkway railway station, M2 Junction 5 at Stockbury, the Kenton Medway Medical School in Canterbury, and the Advanced Technology Horticultural Zone in East Malling. And that's then been reinforced over the summer as we were looking at ways, or government was looking at ways for us to get out of the economic crisis. The Getting Building Fund, which was launched by government for what were called shovel-ready projects, and that tied in very much to, again, a number of these projects. Kenton Medway secured £37 million under that Getting Building Fund, which has contributed to a range of schemes, including Thanet Parkway Railway Station, rural broadband across Kent and Medway, laboratory space in Discovery Park, performing arts activities at North Kent College, Javelin Way, as I've mentioned, and the Britton Farm Learning Skills and Employment Hub in Medway. Thanet Parkway is now, having been a scheme that's been being brought forward over a number of years, now has that commitment of funding from, as I say, a number of government sources, as well as Kent County Council and Thanet District Council's commitment to it. And that is now something which links very closely also to what is going on at Discovery Park. Finally, it's worth mentioning, as a project very much led by national government, of course, we have the Department for Transport's work on the Lower Thames crossing, currently being taken through consultation and the DCO process. That, of course, has major implications strategically in terms of its both as a large-scale project with major employment and construction effects, but also impacts both good and in some cases potentially bad in terms of the rest of the road network in Kent. Finally, I'll just touch very briefly on housing, because that's an area where we see a number of areas of major policy development. Many will be familiar with the government's Planning for the Future white paper and the associated changes to the current planning system. It's no secret that the County Council, like many local authorities, has severe reservations about a range of the measures that are brought forward or proposed in both those consultations, and we have expressed those concerns. In particular, we see a lack of clarity on how you get the linkage between housing development and infrastructure. And it's on that basis that we have brought forward our infrastructure proposition, which we're seeking to take to government very shortly for support through the Single Housing Infrastructure Fund for a range of development and delivery across the county. Finally, I would say simply that our strategic position certainly gives us challenges. We confront in the coming weeks and months a combination of COVID, the end of transition, and potentially the impact of a severe winter. All this amidst severe economic pressures. Nonetheless, the geographical position seems also in many ways to give us opportunities, and some of the key sectors that have been growing in Kent seem set to continue to do so, all of which gives us some grounds for optimism. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Roger. Awful lot of going on at County Hall, clearly, and it's always good to hear the economo-political background to it all. Now, Ashford's impressive revitalisation continues with the exciting redevelopment of the Newtown Railway Works site, which Roger mentioned in his speech. To explain the details of this development, I'm very pleased indeed to be able to introduce our guest speaker, Jeremy Rainbird.
Thank you, Ron. Hello, everybody. Good morning. I hope you can hear me okay. I am Jeremy Rainbird, co-founder of the Creative District Improvement Company. Purposefully pithy in its name, does exactly what it says on the tin. And I think no less exemplified by what I'm going to talk to you about this morning, which is the tremendous site and opportunity at Newtown Works. I'm going to share my screen with you now, so hopefully we won't have any technical hitches. Here we go. Right, 1 second. I hope everybody can see that. So we are an urban regeneration specialist with a difference. We have studios at our heart, and I'll come on to that. It's not necessarily by design, it's by demand, I suppose. And both my business partner, Piers Reid, and I have spent our entire working lives in and around the world of TV and film production. We don't just develop, we advise, we work alongside major developers, the likes of which we're going to discuss today, Quinn Estates being the obvious one in Kent. But with a big difference, we operate as well. And that is a key differentiator to what we do. And I'll come on to explain why. Ooh, sorry, 1 second. First technical hitch, I don't seem to be able to, there we go. Okay, so here's an early CGI from our initial sketches around Newtown Works. That is a section of a sound stage. And the reason why I wanted to talk to you about that specifically is there is some confusion around the word studios and around the word stages. And I just wanted to clarify, so as we go forward, we can get into the detail. What's the difference between a stage, which ostensibly looks like a massive shed, and let's say a logistics shed? Well, the most obvious thing you can see on the left there is it's pillarless. And in some cases, they can run up to 60,000 square feet of pillarless structure. Therefore, you've got an awful lot of engineering in there. Couple that with the fact there's a good example here where you can see some special effects being shot. Therefore, there's a helicopter hanging off the gantry, and you've immediately got significant load bearing on top of the fact that you've also got a pillarless structure. In the case of Ashford, that's 20,000 square feet. But we do work to a principle of 2 tons per square meter, which is, you know, approximately 8 to 10 times that you would normally find in a logistics warehouse for, say, weather. The other key issue, although not very well identified through this CGI because it all looks a bit thin, is acoustics. These controlled shooting environments do need excellent acoustic qualities, and they work to about 25 dB. If you think your average sort of loud voice is 60, you get the idea. They're very dead air environments. Also, you have to think about local population around them, and therefore they do not emit more than 100 dB of noise where possible. A coupling with other things like load bearing on the floor and a few other bits I won't get into, they're pretty specific to what they do. So what is a studio complex or campus? Well, the studio is an overall facility. That, what we've just looked at, is a sound stage. There are other terms for studio, things like shiny floor, multi-camera, but we're not going to get into that today because I want to talk about Ashford. Principally, they're made up on a ratio of 1 to 1 to 1. That's stage space to ancillary, which would be hair and makeup, wardrobe, prop stores, you name it, and then offices. So production offices and support offices in support of the pretty enormous amount of work that goes on within a stage. They're obviously very secure for safety and IP reasons, similar to a data center would be a good way of imagining it. Lots of space for tenants and visiting crew and cast. They need to be flexible spaces, which in itself comes with its challenges. It's sort of a Tetris game, if you like. What does a studio need? Well, it needs excellent transport links and connectivity by road and rail. Obviously, Ashford has that in bucket loads, thanks to its connectivity to Europe. Also, as mentioned earlier, the Thames Estuary Production Corridor, Ashford sits squarely in that. So there's plenty of government support in and around production in this area. It needs excellent power. The stages use approximately 1,000 kilowatts each, and that's before you look outside of those and the rest of the 950,000 square feet that Newtown Works development will cover. Needs excellent data connectivity, approximately 50 GBs of download at any time. We're piping high definition content around the world to edit houses, to special effects houses, and so it needs excellent data. It needs lots of space for people to move around, obviously, and then it needs expert operational management. So it's not simply a case to be able to build one of these things. You need to understand who's operating it. They need to have a big hand in how it's designed. They need to understand what the end user wants, and ultimately then it's a bit like a hotel. They are managing that space over a billable period of time with a concierge-led service. So you never know what your client's going to ask for. You need to provide it. Of course, you're going to bill for it, but it is a very service-led industry, which is why we pose to develop and operate. So, you know, we have the Creative District Improvement Company. However, we also have our operating platform, Time and Space Studios. So in the essence of Ashford, for example, where we're co-developer with Quinn Estates, clearly leading as the expert builder, we will then take a lease across the space and we will operate it for the end users. And I'll come on to who those people are and what they are, because as was alluded to earlier, there is an explosion of demand for content in the world today, and actually has been driven up by the pandemic because of for want of a better expression, a sort of captive audience stuck at home. They need some entertainment. The family needs something to do. People are sort of devouring content greater than ever. Just a little bit about us, but I'll fly through this so I can get on to Ashford. We own and operate Twickenham Studios. We also have a lease over Littlewoods Studios, which is in the Littlewoods building in Liverpool, which is an amazing urban regeneration project that I'll come on to talk about a bit in a minute. And then, of course, Ashford International Film Studios, purposefully called Ashford International, with a nod of the cap to the Eurostar and its connectivity to Europe. So Twickenham, it's a heritage site and brand. As a company, we love heritage. Creativity is all about good stories, and it's all about connecting people with ideology and stories. Twickenham was opened in 1913. Amazingly, when it was opened, it was the largest purpose-built film studio in the country, and it was one of the largest in the world, which is phenomenal now because it's only 3 acres, but it is in a highly densely populated area in West London, which is St Margaret's, one stop away from Twickenham. We are undertaking a £15 million expansion and schedule of improvements, and as you can see from this CGI, we'll be upgrading all of the studios, in some cases making them virtual studios, the likes of which, if anyone watches Disney's Mandalorian, the spin-off of Star Wars, you'll see that there's a big market for now. These spaces can command rents of up to £100 per square foot, so they're premium rents, but of course there's an operating cost that goes into that as well. Within Twickenham, we have Oscar-winning post-production, which is quite unusual to have stages and post-production in one space. And it's a world-renowned facility. Some of the greatest films in the world were shot on our stages, not least Zulu, The Italian Job, The King's Speech, and none other than Blade Runner. So we are extremely proud of the work we do, and there will be work of a similar caliber that will be coming to Ashford. Just quickly before I move on to Ashford, I wanted to talk about the creative industry in numbers. Obviously, these are pre-pandemic numbers. As the chart earlier showed, our industry has taken a bit of a wallop. However, it is back. Production is back. There was a hiatus. All production is now back across advertising, television, film, and other, with the correct safety protocols and measure in place. And I'm proud to say that, you know, our industry has recovered pretty well, all things considered, and of course the demand for content is never greater. And actually, if you look at subscription numbers for the likes of Netflix, they need more demand. You know, those of you out there who have children who chew through content, they're running out of things to watch. We need to provide them more content. They are earning more in fees than ever before, and they want to spend that money in the UK. Creative industry accounts for 14.5% of the gross domestic product of the UK today. It's growing at twice the rate of any other industry in the UK. It's a shame that Downing Street don't talk about it a little bit more and try and protect the arts, because we provide huge amounts of employment. We also provide defense against mass unemployment due to AI in the future. A lot of industries, transport, accountancy and legal, other professions are going to see significant issues around employment protection in the future. Creativity actually is hugely defensible, largely because you can't teach an AI, empathy. UK production in 2019 was worth basically $5 billion, £4 billion into the UK economy. It's primarily American money as well, and we need to provide it facilities in order for it to keep coming. It's believed that there's a 1.8 million square foot deficit in stage space in the UK, and actually not enough stages coming online. We also have a deficit of skilled labour, which is why each of our schemes builds an educational component within it, because we want to train people to provide meaningful employment that also gives us a resource pool to fish. So it's a double benefit to us and the economy. Just very quickly, the distribution of studios across the country. Not surprisingly, concentrated around London. However, we are seeing more up in the north. As I've said before, we're opening some studios in Liverpool, and we are seeing some in the regions. And with the connectivity that Ashford proposes, it makes total sense to us. Just quickly, Littlewoods, and then I'm going to dive into Ashford. Again, phenomenal heritage site, obviously the home of Littlewoods Pools, and it's an amazing building. Liverpool is actually the second most in-demand shoot city in the country, with double figures of shoots on location up there at any one time. The site is owned by Liverpool City Council and has been funded by the Getting Building Fund money, the COVID recovery money that was mentioned earlier. They managed to unlock £15 million with grant money, which has helped to accelerate the scheme. Our operating company, Time and Space, is the anchor tenant alongside Liverpool John Moores University. We're taking approximately 100,000 square feet of space each, and we'll be working very closely together. And in fact, we're giving direct access to the graduates and students, and we're managing their studios and training facilities for them. So it's a great example of private sector working with educational sector to ensure the best possible output together. It's 2,000 square foot, two 20,000 square foot temporary stages, which will be actually up and running by Q2 2021. Again, that's part of the Getting Building COVID recovery money. And the idea being at the end of that 2-year period, we will upgrade them even further and they will be incorporated into the full-time scheme, which is also 20,000 square feet of stages and approximately 40 to 50,000 square feet of ancillary and production and post-production, all opening in 2022. So Ashford, again, heritage site. So a common theme here. We love stories, we love history, and what we're building here is 4 20,000 square foot stages and 150,000 square foot of ancillary space. Now that's not just office space available to the market where people might think, oh gosh, you know, in the sort of post-pandemic world, are people coming back to work? This is primarily educational space. This is primarily space in support of the stages. And like I say, I'm lucky to be able to say right now that even in this current second lockdown we're going into as of tomorrow, our industry will continue to shoot. Our studios remain open. We have all the health and safety measures and protocol in place to make us safe and legally able to do so. That accounts for stages, post-production, locations. Our industry will trade through this and trade on. So all of that space is very much needed and will be hired at a premium. Just quickly, Kent accounts for 45% of all the location filming in the Southeast, believe it or not, with over 400 shoot days a year in Kent run through the film office in County Hall. So there's an enormous amount of film activity in Kent already. And we propose that this will become a hub for that, as well as those that use the stages. And we believe there'll be a creative cluster of 30 plus small businesses providing after sales, if you like, to those hiring the stages, basing there within the complex. You know, so what does this mean for Ashford? Very quickly, we're proposing 1,000 direct jobs, and we're proposing just a little bit more than that, 1,500 indirect jobs. So phenomenal amount of growth for the employment sector in the immediate area. We believe this is going to put £50 million gross value added into the local economy, and it's going to help with the visitor economy as well. Obviously, the wider benefits most of you are aware of, and it sits at the heart of some phenomenal regeneration in Ashford at the moment, not least the Curious Brewery, the recent expansion of the outlet centre, etc., etc. So film studios really do provide significant benefits to the environment that they're placed within, and also they drive significant benefits to their investors and those operating them. So they really are a win-win for the private sector and the public sector. And they get an awful lot of global press attention. So Ashford, you know, has absolutely appeared on the map of Hollywood, New York. We've been in meetings. Mark Quinn himself came over to Los Angeles with us, met with Netflix, Amazon, Apple, HBO, and the first thing they said was, how is Ashford? They are clearly aware of what we're doing, and they are all going to come and work in the environment, which is extremely exciting. Partly because of the facilities, they're world-class facilities, but also partly because Time and Space currently works with the biggest names in the world of film and TV already. And we're known internationally for creativity and production expertise throughout our organization. We know what they need. We speak their language. We've been making television for 20 plus years. And as a result, the likes of Apple and Lucasfilm, believe it or not, have already actually been down to Ashford looking at the site, as have Netflix, as have HBO. The individual client, HBO, is actually originally a Kent lad, although he's relocated to Los Angeles in the last 10 years. This is happening. This is a real opportunity for Ashford. And just to quickly conclude, because I think I'm definitely overrunning, and I hope I haven't rushed too much for you all. Just a lot to talk about. To conclude, studios pose a fantastic investment opportunity. They drive significant revenues and yield for the investors and for the operators. They are a win-win. They're very defensible against the future risks of the workforce. Therefore, an investor into the commercial workspace, they are safer than office blocks, for example. Streaming and content appetite is set to grow. It grew at 17% last year, and due to the pandemic is growing now. So buy shares in Netflix. They're defensible against COVID-19 interruption as a business. Hopefully for now, we'll be trading through this current period of restriction, and we believe that we have the measures in place to continue to do so into the future. They deliver huge employment numbers to the surrounding area. They deliver major GVA to local economies. They're perceived to be very exciting. We within our company call it the Stardust effect. You know, people seem to want to live next door to them much more than they would a storage and logistics shed or a factory. No offense to anybody here who's in that game. They make exceptional enabling arguments for major residential developments. As you can see, they provide significant employment opportunity for those living around them. Thank you for your time. I hope that was useful. Have a lovely day.
Thank you very much indeed, Jeremy. What a great story, and so enthusiastically delivered. And what a coup for the borough and the county to have secured such a high profile project. Well, now we move on to complete our presentations. I'm pleased to welcome Mike Whiting, Kent County Council's Cabinet Member for Economic Development. Over to you, Mike.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ron. Are we there yet? Thank you very much, Ron. I'm just looking to share my screen as well, so hopefully things will go well with this. I hope you can all see that now. Is that there for you, Ron?
Not yet, Mike.
No. Oh, we had these problems earlier. I'll tell you what, Molly, can you unshare, turn my share off and I'll do without.
Hi there, Mike. It's Paul from the Kent and Vids Chamber. Just to let you know, Molly's going to sort out the presentation for you, so we'll get going in just a second.
Oh, okay, fine. That's okay. I can do it without. I'll do it without.
Okay, no worries.
Okay, apologies, everybody. Apologies for that. Some technical issues my end. But there's only 4 slides, so you're not missing dreadfully much. But thank you, Ron, for that. KCC is, of course, enormously pleased to be associated with the Kent Property Market Report, the annual review, as you know, of the sector that makes such an enormous difference and contribution to the Kent economy. I think in order to bring this report and event to you each year, the County Council works with a number of sponsors who've kindly hosted the breakout rooms today. And I would add my thanks of others to Caxtons, to Locating Kent, Holloway Architects, Pips, Pemberton Greenish Solicitors, DHA Planning, Handelsbanken, and of course, MHA McIntyre Hudson. I'm also grateful for the enormous amount of hard work put into this by the Economic Development team at KCC, led by its director, David Smith. It was great to hear just now, actually, from our guest speaker this year, Jeremy Rainbird, outlining those hugely exciting plans for the Newtown works in Ashford. And I think in highlighting the need for creative space, Jeremy also highlights something that was touched on by previous speakers about the wider commercial space deficit we have as a country and here in Kent. And it's something we've heard much of this morning. And certainly KCC is asking central government to address that vital issue as it develops its planning paper proposals, which I'm sure those around the table are familiar with. But last but by no means least, also I'd like to thank Molly and the team at the Kent Invicta Chamber for facilitating this virtual event. I'm also grateful for the Chamber for the work they've done in delivering the Kent and Medway Business COVID Helpline, a project that might normally have taken months of planning in normal times, was up and running within 3 days of the lockdown in March, and has taken over 10,000 calls, many from the construction industry. And I was terribly pleased to be able to announce last month a further investment by KCC to keep that COVID helpline open until the end of the year. I wanted, Ron, if I may, just to talk briefly about one of KCC's initiatives that continues to grow and support the construction industry here in Kent, the No Use Empty scheme. With the UK experiencing challenging times, as we've heard, and the impacts of COVID facing the industry, initiatives such as the No Use Empty are becoming increasingly important in supporting the recovery of the Kent economy, particularly for smaller house builders. Many of you will be familiar with the No Use Empty scheme, which provides loans to bring long-term empty properties back into use. And it's a key way of driving regeneration, particularly in our coastal communities. It's the longest running empty property initiative in the country, providing recyclable loans to businesses. It supports some 1,200 jobs and delivers an average of 600 new homes each year. And more recently, the scheme has provided loans for the delivery of quality commercial space, which, as we've heard, is much needed here in Kent. Earlier in the year, I was pleased to announce a further KCC investment of £12 million in a new loan product, which provides larger secured interest-bearing loans to develop areas of derelict land and bring those back into use. And I'm really pleased, actually, for the No Use Empty team, led by Steve Grimshaw, that KCC has been shortlisted in the category Council of the Year at the UK Housing Awards, organised by Inside Housing and the Chartered Institute for Housing. KCC is, in fact, the only non-housing authority to make the shortlist, and we're all keen to hear the results at a virtual award ceremony next month. In closing, Ron, I'll be brief. I know time is short now, but in closing, we've heard about some of the challenges this year and some of the opportunities, but it's very clear that there is plenty happening within the sector, which, as Sue said in her presentation earlier, supports that much wider Kent economy. We hope next year that we'll be able to return to the traditional breakfast launch and networking event, but until then, I do hope you enjoyed the webinar today and this annual opportunity for the property sector to come together. Ron, if I may, back to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Mike. And we're only ever so slightly overrunning. So maybe we've got time for just a couple of questions. We have one from Graham Galpin, addressed to everyone, who says Eurostar has suspended its service at the moment until 2022. I fear that there may be some reluctance to reopen the service. Are you compromised by the suspension, and are you putting pressure on Eurostar and Department of Transport to force their hand? Well, who should we give this to? Is that a county issue, Mike or Roger?
I'm certainly happy.
Go on, Roger, after you.
Sorry, certainly happy to respond, and I have put a bit of a response in the chat. Certainly, this is something which we, and indeed a number of the other key public sector partners, have been very engaged about. So we did hold a discussion, both Ashford Borough Council, the leader of Ashford Borough Council, myself, the chairman of, the chair of CELEP, held discussions with the Eurostar chief exec and other representatives, I'm guessing about 8 weeks ago, and that was intended to be part of an ongoing discussion. I think there is, a serious desire on their part to reactivate as soon as they can, but they have faced an absolutely catastrophic decline in custom. What they would argue is that they are still on the forecasts that they have, and from that, the time they suggest for reopening, they're still more optimistic than the airlines. clearly they will have to go on reviewing that. But we said equally that we would have that discussion with them continuing. So it remains important. We just had the Ashford Spurs project gone through, so we were all set up on that very nicely. And so the timing is particularly depressing. But I think they do themselves recognise what's at stake for Ashford and indeed for Kent, because we're talking about both the Ebbsfleet and Ashford stops.
Thank you very much, Roger, and thank you, Graham, for the question. One other one, and this looks as if it might be aimed towards County Hall as well, from Bradley Morgan. Have the plans changed to consider the adaptability of flexible spaces to facilitate distanced workspaces? Is that one for you, Roger?
Yeah, I hope I've understood, and apologies, Bradley, if I haven't understood the question precisely. If I take that to be more adaptable workspaces and many people working more remotely, then yes, but it's still very much a work in progress. So it's fair to say we actually had quite ambitious plans for overhauling our estate prior to the crisis, which were based on quite strong assumptions about the amount of time people would spend not in the office already. That is clearly now up for further grabs, and we are in the process of reviewing that probably by about the end of the year to have a clearer picture on it. But I think either way, there will be very significant changes, I think, to our estate, but we're still scoping out exactly what that will mean. I hope I've answered the right question.
Sounded good to me, Roger. Thank you. And thank you, Bradley, for the question. Well, as I say, we've just slightly overrun, but what a fascinating morning with so much information. So it just remains for me to thank all of our speakers and our sponsors, of course, and to remind you that you can download your copy of the full report from our website, kentpropertymarket.com, and Caxtons at caxtons.com. So I look forward to seeing you all again next year for KPMR 2021, when hopefully I shall be able to dig out my freshly sanitized frying pan for a proper post-COVID breakfast for you all. So thank you all for coming, and goodbye.